Starting with the CPU, this is the new 9800X3D. Now you probably already know about this one, it's the fastest gaming CPU available right now. Now beyond that, we are seeing some improvements in productivity performance as well. It's still not going to beat what Intel has to offer for single-thread applications or the 7950X3D in multi-threaded performance or anything like that, but it is an improvement over the previous generation and actually has me really excited to see what comes with the 9950X3D. But if gaming is your main use case, then this is the best money can buy. It's also fully overclockable and easy to cool. As for the motherboard I'll be plugging this into, this is the Asus ROG Strix X870i. It's a very premium, but absolutely stacked motherboard. You've got your overbuilt heatsinks and integrated I/O as you would expect, then room for two M.2 drives under the heatsink at the bottom. Now one of these being PCI 5.0 and the other being 4. There's also a heat shield on the back as well, which is very nice to have, although I would have loved to see them add like a third M.2 slot on the back like what Gigabyte has done in their B650i board. It's AM5, so compatible with the previous 7000 series and the current 9000 series chips from AMD. For connectivity, there's dual USB 4 ports, each with transfer speeds up to 40 gigabits per second, a ton of USB 3.2 and 2.0 ports, but also onboard Wi-Fi 7. The download speed on this board is insane if you have the internet for it. I was able to download Cyberpunk 2077, an 80 gigabyte game, in just over 10 minutes. Holy hell, this might become my new personal motherboard for that alone. Now the downside is that there's no HD audio connector. They want you to use this external Hive device. I like the Hive device. I think it's a nice addition and it can add some convenience to your setup. I just don't like that they think that this is an alternative to HD audio. That part is very frustrating because this is a very, very expensive board that I can't hook up my case headphone jack to. I'm also adding a 32 gig set of DDR5 6000 RAM from Corsair and a 2TB SSD from Samsung. It's going to be important we use low clearance RAM in this build so that they don't get in the way of the CPU cooler, which will overhang these slots. Now we'll talk about the CPU cooler more a little bit later, which is the Noctua D12L by the way, but I'm going to install the spacers and the offset brackets for it now so that our board is, completely set up. Thank you to this video's sponsor, Jawa.gg. If you're not familiar with Jawa, they are the #1 online marketplace where you can find deals on used or new PC components. Now their holiday sale is still going on right now where you can save up to 50% on parts and custom PCs. And the goal of this site is to help gamers buy and sell online without the risk of scams or scalping that happens so often on other platforms. If you use the link in the description of the video and use my code DJ10, you can save 10% off up to $10. You also have the option to sell your own components. That way you can offset the cost if you're wanting to upgrade your GPU or towards a new pre-built. The easiest and fastest way is to sell your existing CPU or GPU directly to Jawa. You can find the instant offer option right on the homepage, and then from there, you just need to fill out some simple details about the part. That way you can receive your instant offer. If you're happy with it, then you can ship it off and most sellers get paid within a single business day. Otherwise, you can have full control over the pricing by listing it yourself. So if you're wanting to save some money on your next PC or upgrade, then check out Jawa.gg. Okay, so now that the board is all prepped, we can look at the case. This is the Johnston T6, a very cool looking 13.6 liter chassis. We've got a split wood and metal design at the front, very similar to the Fractal Terra in that regard. Tempered glass side panel, optional wood handle that can either be on the top or you can put it on one of the sides. CNC machined aluminum panels, and I think aesthetically, it just looks really nice. But from a compatibility standpoint, it does make some strange decisions, and we'll talk about them as we build in it. Now they include the hex driver that you need to open up the case if you don't already have one, and look at how nicely they packaged all the hardware. They even printed out some very simple instructions at the top of the box as well. I really like the way this is all organized. So let's start off by removing the side panels, and the first thing I noticed was just how nice the materials used here are. I don't know what I was expecting, but I really didn't realize that this was like thick CNC machined aluminum panels. At the front, I'm going to install a 140mm fan as intake. This one I got from Noctua. It's the A1425 G2 fans. This is Noctua's next generation of fans, where they've optimized them even further to run quieter and more efficient than before, and I think it's going to fit nicely into this case. You do also have the option to use a 120 instead if you need to, and I'm also going to be using the dust filter from the accessories box. Now once that's installed, we can drop in the motherboard and secure it. This is a flipped configuration case, meaning the GPU is actually at the top instead of on the bottom like you would traditionally see. In the basement, there's room for an ATX power supply up to 140mm in length, so don't just go out and buy any ATX power supply. Many are actually larger than this. The one I have here is from Corsair and it falls within that spec. I believe all the RM series power supplies that end with the letter E fit, so like the RM850E and the RM750E that I have here. There's these rubber grommets for the cables to pass through between the basement and the motherboard section. Now, one of them does get blocked when you use a larger power supply like what I have. So you'll need to feed these cables through the grommets before installing the unit itself. But the cables aren't pinched or anything like that. I'm able to freely pull them back and forth, once the power supply is secured. We also want to connect all the case cables and the power connectors to the motherboard before actually installing the cooler. Otherwise, it's going to be really difficult to reach everything and plug them in. The CPU power is still a bit hard to reach, but it is manageable. Now, I really like that the basement is kind of just like hidden away because there's not a lot that needs to be done for cable management. You just kind of pull them through the grommet and then stuff them back there and you're not going to see them. Okay, so like I mentioned earlier, I'm going with the Noctua D12L. This is considered a low height 120 millimeter class air cooler because its total height with the fan attached is 145 millimeters, whereas most of the popular ones in this class are closer to 160. And you can fit a cooler in here up to 160 millimeters if you go Intel, and then 159 millimeters if you go AMD. This to me, along with the general aesthetic, would be the reason someone would want to buy this case. Hell, when I was looking at it, it looked like it was almost enough to fit like a Noctua D15 G2, 140 millimeter class cooler, but yeah, no, it doesn't. I had to try it anyways though, because some manufacturers, they end up leaving a little bit more leeway than the specs say, but nah, you're not gonna be able to push this one that far. So we can add our thermal paste. I'm actually going to spread it out across the top here as well. Then we just need to unclip the fan and put it to the side. Lower it down over the CPU and then secure it. And I probably should have plugged the fan in as well before securing the cooler because that is now a challenge to reach, but I was able to manage it. The biggest limiting factor of this case is the GPU length compatibility. 2-slot cards at only 215 millimeters of clearance, which significantly reduces the GPU options that's going to fit in this case. As for mainstream offerings, the best GPU that could probably fit is like a 4060 Ti, but that card is pretty hard to recommend this generation. Hopefully we see some smaller 50 series cards over the next few months. But until then, I did get my hands on a fairly rare card. This is a single fan 4070 from Zypher. And this is what I plan to use in the build. Well, until I went to test it and yeah, it's just completely broken. No signal, tried to pop it into another system and yeah, it's just straight up not working. So this was a complete waste of $800. So instead, I had to pivot to the only other card that I have that's gonna fit in it, and that's the Zotac 4060 instead. But you will see the installation process using the 4070 because that's just what I filmed, so keep that in mind. And the GPU installation is actually really simple. So we just take off the top panel, then remove this block on the back so we can access all the slot covers. From there, slide into the PCI Express slot and secure it from the back. And after that's installed, we can resecure the top, bottom, and side panels, and that's the build complete. Okay, so the first thing I wanted to see were those CPU thermals. Considering we have a 140 millimeter fan at the front blowing directly onto the D12L, with that combination of cooling, I'm hoping to see some good thermals here. And yeah, I'm not seeing anything even close to thermal throttling. Maxing at 83 degrees Celsius after a 10-minute multi-core stress test in Cinebench 2024, a worst case scenario for the CPU. It's averaging at 80 degrees Celsius, pulling upwards of 115 to 120 watts. GPU temps are averaging around 71 degrees after over 20 minutes, benchmarking at 1440p in firm mark. I've always really liked the flipped config, especially for GPU temps because the GPU just gets that fresh access to air directly from the top. And so I'm not seeing any issues there. This is a case that's far better suited for a workstation, but that doesn't mean we can't test out some games too. I'm testing out Cyberpunk 1440p Ultra Preset DLSS balance with ray tracing and frame generation off. The CPU is hanging out in the mid 50s, GPU low 70s. I'm seeing similar results in Black Myth Wukong, high preset 1440p DLSS balance, again with ray tracing and frame generation off. A little less CPU intensive in the low 50s and high 40s in this game, with the GPU still hanging out in the low 70s. The finals, high preset 1440p DLSS quality, again, no ray tracing or frame generation. CPU again, low 50s, GPU low 70s. So this is a very interesting case. I was pretty disappointed when I discovered how limiting the GPU length was, just because your options are just so few with that. I don't think I would recommend this case for a gaming focused build at all, but I do think that there's an audience for it, and I am glad it exists. The build quality and materials are outstanding, and I would say that it warrants its pricing. And if you like the aesthetics, which I personally love the look of this, and you don't have the need for a super powerful GPU or anything like that, this is a pretty great option. An example of that would be someone whose main focus is using something like Fusion 360 for CAD work. That's an application that's heavily dependent on single-threaded CPU performance. And with the large CPU coolers you can fit in here, you can properly cool any CPU.